It's the story that seems to remain in the news day after day after day. Over 300 priests found to have engaged in sexual assault on over 1,000 minors in just one state alone. Time now for the atheists to take on the story here on the Atheist Forum.
The no superstition zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340.
Ed Golly in the Tan Talk studio, joined by Joe Reinhardt on the Atheist Forum. And we'll get to the issue of the Catholic sex crimes in just a moment. But first, Joe, it's been about a year and a half, 19 months or so, since our nation's first gold digger, Melania Trump, announced her campaign to address cyberbullying among the nation's youth. You know, I often wonder if it ever occurs to the conservatives the irony of the fact that the most prominent cyber bully in the world just happens to be her husband. Anyway, America's pathological false witness in chief. Seems every week there's some other delay. Presumably there's nothing to report this week, Joe?
Well, as a matter of fact, there is. As the news has been tightening around the liar in chief's neck, his tweets have become, more frenzied, more frenetic, more febrile. Excuse me. And certainly his insults and his bullying has just started going off the scales from his own attorney general down to the people that are at this time willing to testify about his own criminal acts. Mm-hmm. Speaking of irony, the First Lady, Melania, actually issued a statement which several commentators even commented that it was basically trolling her own husband. It said, "Let's face it, most children are more aware of the benefits and pitfalls of social media than some adults." Some adults. That would be an adult to be named at a later date.
The operative word being some.
As soon as she gets back from Africa.
That's right. She did announce her trip to Africa, but what I think was notably absent was any announcement of a return trip. Could there be anything there that we should know about?
Just stay as long as you feel comfortable.
Tell you one thing, if Barron accompanies her on that trip, I wouldn't be completely surprised to see her never show up again. Joe, she's scheduled to age out in about 2 or 3 more years. So if Trump is able to get reelected as a lame duck president, then he'd have no problem, because Trump is a man who believes vehemently in marriage strictly between a man and a woman, and then a younger woman, and then a younger woman. So Melania's days obviously are numbered, and
just give her her trophy and send her
on her way.
That's it.
Well, sexual predators in the church are by no means limited to the Catholic Church or the state of Pennsylvania. Undoubtedly, Florida has no immunity to this or these crimes. The predominance of these sexual predators in the church is, I think, Joe, it's due primarily to the fact that the churches work so diligently to cover up the crimes, while even going as far as to persecute the victims. Now, remember, these are the very people who seek to instill their system of morality upon all the rest of us, whether it's through our institution of marriage, dictating whom we can or cannot marry according to their mythology, women's reproductive rights, while they find it impossible to get their own house in order. Well, a grand jury investigation in Pennsylvania exposed how multiple dioceses in that state covered up sexual abuses by some 301 predator priests against over 1,000 victims over a period of 70 years, going back to the 1950s. At least 14 priests named in that sweeping grand jury report into child sexual abuse in Roman Catholic dioceses in Pennsylvania either have or had ties to Florida. One priest named in the report who worked in Pennsylvania is now living in Boca Raton.
Really?
A victim reported to the Allentown Diocese in 2011 that Reverend Thomas Benestad sexually abused him for 2 years. The alleged abuse reportedly began when he was 9 years old in the 1980s. The diocese reported the accusations. Benestad, according to the report, denied it and other accusations made against him. Benestad was allowed to retire and live in Boca Raton, where he assisted with a local parish. What else? Here's a guy named a former priest, Edward Ganster. He left the priesthood in the 1990s, moved to the Orlando area, and went on to work at Disney World before he died in 2014. This grand jury report from Pennsylvania says church officials gave him a positive reference, even though they had fielded at least one allegation about him sexually abusing a boy.
Any of these 300 priests gone to jail or even been tried for their crimes?
Well, one of them,
alleged crimes, excuse me.
A guy named Robert Bragg was the assistant pastor at Holy Cross Catholic Church in Palmetto from 1991 to 97. He had moved to Florida after impregnating, knocking up a teenage girl in Pennsylvania, according to the grand jury report. He was the guy that I think that married her and then had the marriage dissolved. No, he didn't go to jail. Not at all. So what are they saying about all this stuff? Bishop Frank DeWayne is the leader of the diocese in 8 other counties just south of where we are. He issued a letter to local Catholics in response to the grand jury report, which states he found the report utterly appalling and deeply disturbing. The diocese asked that a statement of his be read at Sunday masses and also posted it on its website and Facebook page. Now, here's what he said. I'm going to quote him. The Diocese of Venice and its entities take very seriously the safety of all young people and vulnerable adults. To this end, the diocese works to prevent any instances of abuse, particularly against minors and vulnerable adults, with a zero tolerance policy. But what exactly is that? And why hasn't the Pope himself come out and proclaimed something similar? An absolutely zero tolerance policy that if accusations arise, we will bring in the local authorities. We will investigate to the full extent and prosecute to the full extent of the law. We will not tolerate this. They could take them out and burn them at the cross. That's kind of a Catholic tradition, isn't it, Joe? Bring back a little bit of nostalgia into the Catholic religion.
Right.
Use green wood.
Just like Torquemada. Well, I'd like to see him bring back Catholic at the stonings. Or, excuse me,
Yeah.
I misspoke. I'd like to see him bring back Latin, the original Latin at the stonings.
Well, to me, it speaks to the opacity of the church, that they don't want any kind of outside interference with their activities, and they are seeking most adamantly to protect their income and their business, which is the business of the retail sale of superstition. They have a flow of money coming into the church that they don't want interrupted, although we're going to point out shortly that, as a matter of fact, that is getting to be a problem for them as a result of some of this stuff.
I'm sorry, how do you mean that the flow of money is going
Well,
to
the
be a problem?
donations are starting to suffer because
Yeah,
when that plate's being passed in front of you on Sunday morning, you want to think that your money is going to pay off hush money or pay off settlements to kids that were abused by priests.
right, as opposed to going to feed the poor, right, or some other such nonsense that they often say.
Right.
And Catholic Charities frankly, I don't know, it's almost like a front organization in my mind. They frequently point to all of the wonderful things that Catholic Charities do. And I won't argue that they don't do some good along that line by the very reason that there are so many people who need help and assistance of any description. But Robert Ingersoll said that the church made 2 orphans for everyone that it helped. I think that's a pretty good guess. I think that the amount of misery and poverty that are perpetrated by the church, and the Catholic Church being the biggest, is one of the leaders in that field. Upton Sinclair had quite a bit to say on that subject at one time. In any case, the money is what it's all about. Other than bingo games and church suppers and that sort of thing, the church doesn't produce anything. It's not as if they have a factory or they provide any real tangible services other than, as I mentioned, through their charities. I will point out again that much of the money for those charities doesn't even come from the Catholic Church or its own members. It comes from the federal government and from their faith-based initiatives. And so no matter how much money the Catholics are giving to charity, it's a tiny percentage of what it ought to be. And it's a tiny percentage of what it ought to be compared to the fact that they ought to be taxed no matter what they do with their money.
Don't even get me started on the most prominent bagman for the Catholic in the history of the church, Mother Teresa. Right? I mean, just
well, I'm recommending authors. I would certainly recommend the
Hitchens,
Christopher Hitchens, and The Missionary Position,
yes,
which is an expose on Mother Teresa, and is certainly well worth reading. So, but in any case, a drop-off in donations is the one thing that will get the church's attention very quickly. They're starting to having to sell off real estate, declare bankruptcy, whatever it takes to protect their assets, because, as I say, they don't actually produce anything. It's not as if they have an inventory. Their inventory is whatever fantasy they want to make up at the moment. So, people who remain in the Catholic Church, I think, need to ask themselves, is it moral to belong to this organization? Is it an organization that can be saved? We've seen this horror stories coming out of Pennsylvania. That's only one state in one country.
I understand today that Illinois and one other state up there, Missouri, are calling now for similar investigations and will very probably be seating grand juries. Associated Press released a report on Monday that was published in the Tampa Bay Times about parishioners who are really reconsidering the amount of money that they donate or commit to donations to the church. One of them said, here's a quote, "In an organization that spans the whole world like the Catholic Church, they have 1.2 billion adherents worldwide. You don't know where your money is going. And when you read about these priest abuse scandals, it just raises that question to the higher power, the highest power, in fact. What is this money going for?" That's a darn good question.
Right. I would be so disappointed, because if I gave money to the church and found out it wasn't going to support some giant monolith, some overly grandiose edifice that only got used 1 or 2 days a week, by and large, at least by any crowds, I'd be really disappointed if my money wasn't being squandered on things like cathedrals, at the very least.
Well, that's the history of the church in Western Europe, is that the cathedrals took generations to build, and they were to the Dark Ages what the Pentagon is to this country today. They just sucked all the excess money out of the communities to build these enormous cathedrals that the designers knew they would never live to see completed because they would take generations to build, and they are remarkable structures. I mean, to see them, it's just to be dumbfounded at how they could do that with the limited technology they had at the time.
Well, you need a cathedral in order to practice a religion that preaches poverty and basically sell everything that thou hast and give it to the poor.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't have a cathedral to hear that message in, where would you hear it?
A guy named Dr. Edward Peters, a Zoka chair at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit. Here's what he said. I'm just saying, be careful about punishing the spouse of Christ and her dependent children, because some priests and even bishops, men presumably wedded to her as Jesus was wedded to her, abandon her so shamelessly. This is the 21st century, and people are still carrying on this insanity, these incredible myths from the Bronze Age. This stuns somebody like me who was never reared in any kind of religion. Fortunately, both of my parents were atheists. So I was never indoctrinated in any of this stuff. And I would submit to you that if anybody in this day and age was reared to the age of 21, having never heard anything about religion, and then was introduced to it, it would be forehead slapping inanity to them. They would be dumbfounded that anybody can subscribe to this stuff. Yeah. But people are still talking about this like it's the real world. You know, it's unbelievable.
I can't imagine the gibberish coming out of this guy's mouth, the marriage to Christ and the
Virgin and all.
Yeah, and the idea that the Pope, he doesn't mention that, but the Pope is God's vicar on earth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
but isn't it because, Joe, that it's initiated as soon as a kid can speak English or understand?
Oh yeah, long before they're ever able to make
You're
any sort of critical judgment.
The Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. Curiously, there's more evidence for the latter three than the first one. I put my tooth under a pillow, and the next morning there was a quarter there. So I have evidence the Tooth Fairy is real. You know, I went to bed on Christmas Eve, got up the next morning, there was a toy under the tree. I have evidence that Santa Claus is real. But what evidence do we have?
I have seen the Pecos River, which is all I need to know. The Pecos Bill was a very real person.
See what I mean? Exactly. So we have evidence of that. I've seen Tinkerbell. I know she's a very jealous female who flies around and sparks fly out of her
wings.
But I have no evidence of an angel, a heaven, the existence of a Jesus, a virgin birth. There's no evidence of anything reported by the Bible, and yet people still subscribe to it.
Well, again, it's one thing to subscribe to the idea when you're convinced, and the evidence, such as it is, that's coming to light, is that the organization is at least somewhat the benevolent institution that it claims to be, that they're not burning people at the stake anymore, or draping them over the wheel, or stretching them on the rack. And then when you find out that the organization is actually corrupt financially and sexually and morally, why would you want to remain a member of that organization? I mean, if you found out that the Boy Scouts was a front for the Nazi party, would you want your kid to be a Boy Scout?
The answer, Joe, is because the Boy Scouts don't promise you eternal life. And I think that in the same way that racism can be the force that gets a Donald Trump elected in this country, so too is the desire to be convinced and believe that life is an infinite experience, that human consciousness in each of us as individuals will never come to an end, to subscribe to the most inane superstitions ever conceived.
As long as people can be convinced that the priesthood or the clergy or some sort of supernatural connection involves holding and making available to you the keys to heaven, they're willing to put up with quite a bit of inconvenience so long as they do finally make it up there to the pearly gates, and the hell with the rest of us, no pun intended.
We mentioned that 2 other states are starting investigations, and it's hardly limited to the United States. The Pope, as a matter of fact, today is in Ireland. Now, what's he doing there? That's very simple. His weekend trip, he's going to be meeting with victims of, guess what? Sexual abuse committed by the clergy there. He will be addressing an issue that's enraged Irish Catholics and damaged the church's standing in that country. The Pennsylvania scandal echoed the abuses exposed in Boston 16 years ago, punctuating what critics have called the Catholic Church's ingrained culture of masking criminal conduct. There's morality for you, isn't it? Isn't that the definition of it?
Concealed the treatment of unwed mothers who were basically forcibly remanded to their care, and basically used them as slave labor for their own profit. And that's just one tiny example, and that doesn't include the other ways that they were abused.
Well, critics are calling this the masking of criminal conduct, protecting deviant priests and silencing the victims. And that's been going on ever since, probably since the birth of the church. Right?
Rico, can you say Rico?
Similar scandals have erupted elsewhere during the Pope's tenure, including Chile, Australia. I can imagine it's rampant through Central America, and there's virtually nothing those people can do about it. Central and South America.
Yeah, they just had, I think it was Cardinal Pell. Tim mentioned, even wrote a song, Come Back, Cardinal Pell. That's from Australia.
Well, Ireland has its own history of sexual abuse committed by clerics and other emotionally wrenching church scandals. We're going to expand a little bit on what we call black-collar crimes and why they are so easily perpetrated here on the Atheist Forum. We're also going to talk about what's going on, or more importantly, what's not going on here in Florida. Why isn't there an investigation going on in this state? We're now the 3rd largest state population-wise in the country. We hardly have any immunity from this same kind of thing. So,
Governor Katz, with a K, a Protestant Baptist, I believe, was elected governor at the beginning of the 20th century on the promise that he would run the Catholics out of Dade City, Florida, and wow. Out of the state completely, get rid of them. Of course, they still have the university in Dade City, so that didn't go well for him.
Wow.
But it's been a problem for us for a long time.
Well, you're listening to the Atheist Forum here in the Tan Talk Radio Network, what we think is the most interesting program on the network. A lot of people probably would like to see us taken outside and lynched on the spot, but that's fine. Because we have the same thing that parishioners of the Catholic Church have to protect us and them, which is called the Constitution. Without it, our country would be another kingdom, which is similar in every way to a dictatorship. We'd have no civil liberties or freedoms of speech, but we have them, not because of anything found in the Christian Bible, but because of the contents of the United States Constitution. And we're going to exploit that to the fullest extent possible. We'll invite your calls at 441-3000 after we take just a moment to tell you a little bit about Atheists of Florida, and then we'll be back right here on WTAN. Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com. Well, Pam Bondi took a bribe from Donald Trump to prevent her from investigating his fraudulent Trump University. We know there were probably scores or maybe even hundreds of victims in Florida who thought they would learn how to get rich by enrolling in Trump U, and they didn't. Donald Trump ended up paying a $25 million settlement from the victim of his fraudulent Trump University, which is now, since he's such a superb businessman, defunct. Well, here at the Tan Talk Radio Network, we Atheists of Florida would like to hear from our listeners, and in keeping with the lack of morality of Pam Bondi, bribery's not beneath us either. No. We can offer something significantly more valuable than $25,000 if you are a believer. And what that is your very own Get Out of Hell Free card. So just call us up at 441-3000. That's 441-3000.
Have you got one handy, Ben?
Our esteemed engineer, Vaughn, will take your name and address, and you will soon be receiving your own personal card delivered to your doorstep by uniform messenger, along with a few other fun items we can stuff into the envelope. And if you call in, as long as you're talking to him, go ahead and talk to us. We'd like to hear your comments here on the forum.
Ed,
what do you think of it? Right
I think
or wrong?
It looks very familiar. It says, Get Out of Hell Free. And this card may be kept until needed or sold. That's really good news. So if you'd like one, don't hesitate. Give us a call, 727-441-3000. It's free. I'm telling you, free to the first caller. Get Out of Hell Free. What could be better than that?
Shoot, any caller today. You've got half an hour to give us a call, 441-3000, and you will get your very own Get Out of Hell Free card, which you can use if necessary or sell to the highest bidder. Joe, you've got something to tell us from the... well, okay. We'll take our first caller after Joe quotes from the Bible. Stand by, please.
In the past, we've had a quote of the foreseeable future to a Bible quote of the week, this being a show about atheism. And so it's always nice to present the opposing view. So our quote for today is from the book of Matthew, the 19th chapter, the 12th verse, one of my favorite verses. And I want to say before I read this, kids, children, do not try this at home. Matthew 19:12. For there are some eunuchs, and there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men. And there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. I think to summarize it, basically, Jesus wants you to castrate yourself. And if you don't, this is written in red. These are the words of Jesus himself. I don't want to say that you're a hypocrite. Or a hypocrite. But it's hard to believe that any true follower of Jesus could read this verse and not want to emasculate himself at the first opportunity.
All right. We've got a caller on the phone. Go ahead, caller. Thanks for calling the Atheist Forum. How can we help you?
Yes, this is Oswald Fussell here, and I've been listening to you guys for quite a while, and I'm kind of impressed, I guess. I wanted to mention the Magdalene laundries. As long as the Pope is in Ireland, I understand that there were about 30,000 women who were in prison. They called it the Magdalene Asylum for Penitent Females.
They closed down in the end of the 90s, didn't they?
I love the name.
Yes, in 1996.
Yeah.
It's typical of religion in that whatever claim religion tends to make, if you reverse it by 180 degrees, you're much more likely to arrive at the truth. What was the name of that of those washerwomen slave places one more time?
The Magdalene Asylum for Penitent Females.
Right. That's as good as the Jimmy Swaggart Home for Unwed Mothers.
Something like that, yeah. It was very, very successful, I understand, although they lost a few. They
worked them to death.
Uncovered 155 corpses
wow.
on the grounds of one of these places.
Wow.
I thought that was kind of interesting. However, they're still promising eternal life. In fact, I'll promise eternal life. especially now that you're going to give me one of them there cards.
I sure am.
All right.
That's right. All right. Thanks for checking in with us.
Okay.
We call it black collar crime, right? When will Florida State Attorney General Pam Bondi call for a grand jury investigation into potential abuses in Florida? My guess, about never.
Yeah, or thereafter.
And why? Well, because Bondi's sole focus is her own career. We pretty much know that by now. She wouldn't risk a threat to her position within the religious right conservative party by doing anything that would ever threaten the business of religion. She demonstrated that she has no integrity whatsoever when she accepted that $25,000 bribe from Trump to squelch any investigation into Trump University, in spite of having received numerous complaints from Florida residents whom she has been hired to protect about that investigation. She kind of blew it off by saying, well, the New York State Attorney General's taking care of it, so I don't need to. But we all knew how to read between the lines. She wanted a job in the Trump administration. And when he first came into power, he didn't realize that even though it would be very embarrassing for her to need to answer questions about her acceptance of that bribe in any kind of a Senate confirmation hearing, that today he could get away with that easily. It'd be no problem. She could just openly state that, yeah, I just, I wanted the bribe and I took the bribe and I understood it was a bribe. That's how I do business. What's the damn problem? And they would still vote her in. But then the Trump presidency was in its infancy and he didn't want to risk that because he didn't realize the control he could have over the Republican Party. So, we clearly see she has no interest whatsoever in serving the citizens of Florida if it poses any threat to her political future to do so. If she had an ounce of integrity, she'd be calling for an investigation. She'd be asking any Floridian who claims to have been abused by any church official to submit a report to her office so it could be investigated. And if a sufficient number of complaints were received, she too could seat a grand jury to investigate the full extent of abuse going on in Florida's churches.
I would be more sympathetic. I'd be more sympathetic to Pam Bondi if it weren't for the fact that she has never seemed reluctant of other issues and legal matters without being prompted or acting or even directly affected by those issues. I'm trying to think of a specific example off the top of my head. The one that comes to mind, of course, was during her early tenure. I'm not sure she was, I think, yes, she was Attorney General at that point, but after the floods in New Orleans, there was an orphaned dog that she adopted. And then when the actual owners, provably the owners, that was never a question, appeared, she refused to give them their dog back. Now, how much of a petty jerk does one have to be to try to deprive a family that's been decimated by the forces of nature out of their pet? Pam Bondi needs to get a job with animal services, okay? That's where her heart lies. That's what she should be doing. She should be out making sure that everything and everyone is spayed and neutered, just like she is.
Don't you think playing piano in a horror house might be a little more suitable?
Well, more dignified, I'm sure.
Anyway, the thing about the church, though, is it's the primary focus of the church is not their adherents, their members, because though they are designated as sheep, they are followers. They have no say in how the church is run, what rules it runs by, and so on. Completely opposite to the principles of American government, wherein we as citizens can vote for who has power and control. We can vote to change or amend our Constitution and so on. The church is the exact opposite of that, and they want to retain that power because it's so beneficial to them. It's so profitable to them that it's a business conglomerate that strives first and foremost to survive. It's an environment of profit above all, as religion extracts billions of dollars from the poor and gullible of the world, usually those who can least afford it, to retain power, control, and financial security. Say something.
Oh, is it my turn?
Yes.
Well, Ed, I'm sorry to have to say this, but I agree with you 100%. When it comes to the churches.
But no, that's why we're not hearing zero tolerance policies from the Pope or any of the clergy, even though this is nothing new. This is just a repetition of what we've seen happen time and again.
What surprises me is that we haven't heard more from the other denominations. If so-and-so is a politician, the first thing, if he's a Democrat, the first thing his Republican opponent would point out was, well, this man was arrested for child abuse or failure to pay his child support or jaywalking or whatever it was. And so I'm surprised that although I suspect that tacitly, at least not in the press, but amongst themselves, that there is just such a movement to say, hey, we got plenty of room over here in the evangelical movement. We don't have guys chasing after little boys and molesting children, if you don't count guys like Jim Baker and Jimmy Swaggart and what was his name? Got arrested.
If only I had my coffee cup.
Yeah, exactly.
All of them on there.
Well, no, he got outed for buying meth and having sex with his physical therapist, but he was very active in the anti-gay movement and in the anti-gay marriage movement. And I think it was one gay leader who came out and said that Ted Haggard, thank you, said he really admired Ted Haggard for his ability to take a penis out of his mouth long enough to decry homosexuals.
You're listening to the Atheist Forum on the Tan Talk Radio Network, and we invite your calls, comments, or insults. I like it. 3,000. Call us up at 441-3000. We'd be glad to hear from you. And if you don't call in, we'll just keep on talking. It's the voice of atheism in Florida. And our website is talk.aof.ngo, or just go to atheistofflorida.com. And if you do call us up today, we're going to send you your very own Get Out of Hell Free card, which could be valuable if Joe is actually wrong, which he's never admitted to be. But I think what strikes me most significantly about all of this is not that it's happening, because it's something that continues to happen, and it doesn't come to as a surprise to us when it's revealed that it does, but it's the foundation of why this can happen, which is that I think, to begin with, the foundation of religion was not what Voltaire said, that religion was invented by the first knave who met the first fool, but rather religion's foundation was an effort by humans to explain or understand the visible universe that they lived in, having no science to help them do it. And so from the position that they could observe the world, they couldn't understand it until science came along to help offer the legitimate explanations of where we stand in the universe and what it's all about. So it wasn't invented from a position of malice, but once these priests and bishops understood the power that they could have when they joined forces with the kings of the different European countries, they realized that this was a gold mine and a form of power and control that they were not ever going to relinquish, and have not done so to this day.
The first thing that the Levites do when Moses comes down off Mount Sinai is kill, I forget, thousands upon thousands of their own brethren, sort of as an evidence of their fealty to Moses. So from day one, we have the very idea that no dissent will ever be allowed. And I don't think it grows so much out of malice, but again, in those times, I imagine that dissent wasn't settled by way of argument or debate. It was settled by whoever could successfully wield the biggest rock.
Or guillotine, right?
Well, as technology got better.
So this is why today, in order to preserve its control and its income, they start with children as soon as they can understand English by instilling these ideas in them and convincing people that faith is a virtue, that to believe in something for which there is absolutely no evidence is something that one should be proud of, should boast about.
I don't know about other believers, but for me, I can think back to probably my earliest recollection of the religious message was learning to sing the song or say the prayer every evening. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
But as we always say at the end of
he is strong. But the point is that you are taught from day one that Jesus loves you. He's willing to do anything for you, and you owe him big time.
And he's always watching over you, right? Which is a form of a comforting assurance to people who live lives of insecurity, which, that's part of the life experience. We all have certain insecurities, and if we all are taught that this Jesus is always looking over us and going to protect us and watch out for us, then it's kind of like having mom always around, right? Even though she isn't. So we see that children are vulnerable and conditioned from a very early age to subscribe to these ideas so that they're hooked for life. And so even when something like this enormous incident of sexual abuse by so many priests becomes exposed, you should pardon the expression, the adherents don't question the religion. They still subscribe to the religion and say they're going to still be faithful to it. The only thing they question is how much money they're going to give them off their...
They want to overcome this evidence, this foul stench of being a party to these crimes, which they are. They're hoping to finance them. But they want to overcome those by faith, by having their faith step in and fill that void for them, which again begs the question, well, what makes you think faith is a virtue to begin with? Why would one think that their willingness to degrade themselves by worshiping someone or something is in some way enhanced and improved because it's not very likely to be true? To me, again, this is just building a house on a bed of sand. I can't think of any better way to describe
and
that.
Getting back to Bondi, we know she accepts bribes. Is it not conceivable that some of the major congregations in Florida got together and say, we can't have any kind of investigation into our crimes, so we're going to put together a sack of cash and deliver it to Bondi? Since she's a lame duck, she doesn't need it for her political campaign, and we know that she respects all denominations. She just prefers 50s and 100s in used bills in unsequential numbers.
Well, let's just say,
but,
or
why doesn't she do this?
Let's just assert that basically she has a track record where what she should have is a criminal record.
That's right. We have a caller, excuse me, on the Atheist Forum. Go ahead, caller. Thanks for calling. How can we help?
Well, Fussell here again. Listen, you're giving me that get out of jail free card. How can I use it? I can't take it with me. Can I?
Well, you'll figure out something.
My advice,
I don't know, swallow it on your deathbed.
My advice would be to do what we do, and that is sell them.
Sell them.
Yeah, the immediate rewards will have to suffice as a consolation to infinite torture.
But with all the crispy time I'm looking at, what am I going to do?
Well, I'm not exactly a life coach, My advice
Oh.
is get yourself a good insurance policy and make me the beneficiary.
Oh, that way you can guarantee that be able to avoid a bad fate.
I can guarantee that sooner or later you're going to make somebody happy.
I've always wanted to do that. Thank you so much. You're such a comfort.
Yes, no problem. Call us anytime, and be sure and give the engineer your address so we can send you the card.
Well, I sure will.
Okay.
Thanks a heap.
Thank you.
Well, anyway, we're still watching this story unfold on a daily basis. We're going to see investigations in states with state attorneys general who actually respect their constituents and want to see justice done and are not afraid of the church, which is a good thing because, this couldn't have happened in Western Europe 500 years ago. And it still won't happen in states where the attorneys general are more interested in their political future than they are in the protection of their constituents.
I want to get back for a second to the tip of the iceberg argument that you've mentioned a couple of times having to do with Pennsylvania. It's only 6 dioceses out of 8 in one state. It's really just a tiny, and since that report was released, apparently there's a hotline to report abuse, and it's just been ringing off the hook. Other people wanting to step forward and say, well, add my name to this list. But I want to dispel what I think are two incorrect notions. One is that this is solely black-collar crime, that the Catholic Church or even the Christians in particular are more prone to it than any other religion. In religions where you have monogamy and marriage of barely pubescent young girls and so on are pretty common. So things could very well be considerably worse. And the other point is, again, it's not a recent phenomenon. It's been going on since man crawled out of the slime. Recommend another book. It's called The Papacy Unzipped, and it goes through the history of various popes and anti-popes and their conflicts. And it's the first time I ran across the word pornocracy. And it describes their form of government basically as a pornocracy. So this is nothing new, taking advantage of children of all ages and all genders. It's been going on wherever power has permitted it, and power has been centered in various religious organizations, more so than any other form of power. Hence, they're more prone to it.
It's symbolic of the tradition of respect that we give to religion, whether it earns it or not. When we go back to the founding years of this country, land was available for churches to gobble up, and then they weren't going to get taxed for it. Well, we live in a different world now where churches should be paying property taxes like the rest of us because they're getting all the same benefits of it. And yet they would fight this vehemently because they want to be opaque in their dealings. They don't want the government coming in, seeing how they use their money, how much they take in, what they do with it. And that then extends to the crimes that their representatives may commit. Now, Joe, you and I know that there have been incidences where embezzlement took place within a church. Rather than expose it, the elders of the church decided that they would just whitewash it because they did not want to have any kind of a threat posed to their income stream. And the parishioners don't want to be thinking, gee, I might be donating money to the church that's going into the church treasurer's pocket because she's embezzling it. So by covering the crime, they keep their income stream going.
Or by making a flagrant activity so that it seems like an accomplishment. And by that, I'm referring to the prosperity gospel preachers, which is, I needed a $65 jet, $65 million jet, so I can go around and tell more people about Jesus. And now Jesus wants me to have a $90 million jet. So
So we're in modern times. It's time.
So rather than try to conceal it, a lot of people just gotten upfront about it and made it look like an accomplishment.
Mhm.
Oh, please.
Well, Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit organization. The government requires us to report all the income that we have and how we spend it, what we do with it, and how much is left at the end of the year. Churches should be doing the exact same thing. Any organization, including ours, if we own a building, we should pay taxes on it. If it's worth having this building, if it's important, if people support it, we should contribute the same as everybody else, because there's no reason that other people in Clearwater or Tampa or anywhere in Florida should pay higher taxes to support what we want to do. The foundation of this is that educational organizations or organizations that somehow help the community can get a break from taxes so that they can contribute to society. But I think we've gotten to a point where we're kind of beyond that. It's time to revisit this stuff and say, whether you're an atheist organization or a church or, in any kind of an organization where you are a membership organization and you are addressing members who have a certain, political or philosophical ideology, that you need to pay to be a part of that community. You need to help support the fire departments and the garbage collectors and the street pavers and everything that it takes to keep a community running the same as everybody else does, whether they agree with you or not.
Apart from everyday normal greed, I can't understand why churches wouldn't be enthusiastically in favor of supporting public services. They tell us about all their charitable activities. If they paid taxes, a lot of those people wouldn't need their charitable activities. And if nothing else, they certainly, as stewards of the land, would want nice, safe bridges and highways, good police departments, safe water supplies, and on and on and on. The fact that they're not even willing to contribute to the general overall welfare of the community at large does not speak well for an institution that prides itself, brags about how charitable they are.
As well as the fact that they are not transparent in showing us what they take in and what they do with it, and how they use these funds. They could get a write-off for paying hush money to a sexual assault victim or something like that, but they don't want to tell us about it. And this is the modern era. It's time for us to revisit these laws and hold them accountable. We see the evidence of this all the time, day after day, year after year. Well, that's all the time we have for the Atheist Forum today, and I hope you'll join us again next week on the forum. Along with Joe Reinhardt, I'm Ed Golly, reminding you, if the story seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down.
Make them prove it?
Yeah! You have been listening to the Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. And join us again next Friday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.